The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar, India Middle East Europe Corridor, a counterbalance to the BRI. The India Middle East Europe Corridor was first announced in September 2023 during the G20 summit in New Delhi. Known as IMEC, its aim was to boost economic and strategic ties between these key regions, establishing a robust transport network via railways, shipping lanes and digital infrastructure. But can the new corridor serve as a counterbalance to China's successful Belt and Road Initiative? How might it enhance India-EU linkages? And what are the financial, sustainability and other considerations facing the development of IMEC? To learn more, tune into our live debate, bringing your comments and questions for our expert panel.
Hello and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley, and this is a Democracy Forum debate where we explore, examine and discuss significant issues of the day, ones that are often overlooked by the mainstream media and commentariat. And today's is one of those: India, Middle East, Europe corridor, a counterbalance to China's Belt and Road Initiative, ? The BRI, as it's known, was launched amid global fanfare in 2013. IMEC, as this one is known, came 10 years later at the G20 summit in Delhi. The first run by an autocracy with a clear vision of where it wants to go. The latter, a concept imagined by a coalition of Middle Eastern monarchies, North American and European democracies, and India. Does IMEC have any chance of catching up and counterbalancing? To find out, we have an expert panel: Alberto Ritzi, Jean-Loup Samaan, Nilanjan Ghosh, and the Democracy Forum chair, Gardiner, is with us throughout, and he's going to mark up how well we've done at the end. And before any of that, I have the privilege of asking the Democracy Forum President, Lord Charles Bruce, to lay out the canvas and the background of our debate. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, which will look closely at the proposals floated 2 years ago for IMEC, a new economic corridor linking India to Europe via the Middle East. I'm grateful to the team at TDF for arranging this event and for securing the participation of our panelists. And I thank them all for agreeing to join the discussion today and for sharing their perspectives with us. And we're also indebted to Humphrey Hawksley for fulfilling the role of moderator. Seeking a legacy to match India's aspirations for the 2023 G20 summit, Prime Minister Modi unveiled a framework document laying the foundations for a new trade route involving maritime and rail transportation, connecting Mumbai in the east with Piraeus in the west, and planned not only as a transportation corridor with logistics hubs. IMEC will also connect energy producers in the Middle East to markets in Asia, while also improving secure digital connectivity. The enabling agreement was signed by all the connecting parties: India, the USA, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the EU, France, Germany, and Italy. For international trade, the IMEC initiative is starkly ambitious. Immediate economic advantages will be realized by reducing transshipment times between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean by 40%, equivalent to a reduction of 12 days, thereby generating savings of $5.4 billion for Asian-European trade. And for India, the creation of an economic corridor would generate an increase of between 5 and 8% in trade, thus achieving an additional $22 billion in additional export value annually. Roughly half of India's total crude oil demand is met by Gulf countries, while a critical share of its domestic gas market is supplied by a 20-year LNG contract with Qatar. But political risks are also starkly apparent. As the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace noted in a paper, the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, Too Little Too Late, notes that the United States, I quote, is pushing IMEC as a counter to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. But China already has considerable influence along the proposed route. Moreover, the deep financial ties between China and the Arab Gulf limits the ability of IMEC to challenge Beijing's influence in the region. It's not clear that the United States will be able to counter it. Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch our webinar today. And if you have any comments or questions, please pass them to the panel through the chair.
Thank you very much, Lord Bruce. Starkly ambitious or too little, too late? Let's get answers on that. Our first panelist is Alberto Ritzi from the European Council on Foreign Relations, specializing in geoeconomics. In other words, how to use trade, investment, finance, and infrastructure, and so on, to advance national power and geopolitical objectives. Among the many hats he's worn has been involvement in the Italy-China Foundation that promotes institutional business and other links between those two countries. So, what is the Middle East, Europe corridor, Alberto Ritzi, and what's it doing now?
Thanks, Humphrey. Well, that would be $1 million question in the sense that in practical terms, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor is, as it's been introduced, a proposed connectivity project to link India, the Gulf countries, Israel and the Mediterranean with Europe. And it is an infrastructural effort promoted by a US-led coalition. But if we move into conceptual terms, IMEC has been indeed imagined as a counterbalance to the massive influence and economic power that China has been able to project abroad through its Belt and Road Initiative. And it is an initiative imagined to push back against this influence, not as an alternative, I would say, and we would look a bit more into detail why it is not, but rather as a counterbalance or as a complementary effort. So some of the partners that are signatories to IMEC are also signatories to the BRI, notably the Gulf countries, and to them it's not an out, it's an idea to cooperate with both, while for India is a completely different concept, and for European countries it is a way to show that they are still able to produce infrastructural initiatives and efforts to develop connectivity abroad. And IMEC in itself, it does not have the scope, the resources, or the overall dimension to be a global counterbalance to the BRI, because it is a geographically localized initiative. Yes, it spans a good chunk of the globe if we look at the length of the route, but it aims to connect very specific nodes in international supply chains and trade routes. And it is a tailored effort that seeks to leverage the interest and the strategic aims of the countries involved in order to develop a connectivity initiative that seeks to provide a balance, a complementary option to the ones offered by China. And one of its greatest merits is that it is the first entirely new project promoted by a Western-led coalition with an actual trade route. So compared to other ideas like the Build Back Better or the Global Gateway from the EU, IMEC is an actual connectivity project. It's not a global initiative where you would fit other connectivity ideas, but it is an effective trade route proposed. And another point of strength, again, in counterbalance to the BRI, is that it is not a pre-packaged Chinese imagined, Chinese thought, and Chinese finance initiative as the BRI is, but it builds on what those countries are already planning or thinking to do in order to enhance connectivity between themselves, and builds upon those projects, giving them strategic depth with an ability to be part of a greater effort. And in this regard, it is conceptually different by promoting a collective effort rather than a single one-state promote idea like the Belt and Road in China. And it offers also countries like India or the Gulf partners that until not long ago were normally on the receiving end of such types of initiative, a role of direct protagonists and equal players to Western actors. And again, this is also something that China does not offer in its BRI. It's clearly led by China, and countries can either sign up or not, but they're not part of the real discussion of the projects. And finally, what renders IMEC important as a counterbalance, and we still, well, the jury is over on that, and we will need to wait until it actually develops to understand if this effort would be successful or not, is that it promotes an entirely new model. Through the BRI, China has been able to push forward its own autocratic, technocratic, if you want, development model, which has very specific characteristics, and offered it to mostly countries in the global south, presenting it as the best way out of poverty and the best way to reach a significant economic status. Well, IMEC brings forward a completely different idea and tries, especially through India, to put forward a new model that democratic countries can still be effective partners in building not just connectivity, but also economic development and new supply chains, and offering this kind of blueprint as an idea that developing economies have a different pathways compared to the Chinese one. And while this is more a long-term engagement, obviously this, I think, is the crucial element into understanding how IMEC is more of a counterbalance and a complementary effort than an alternative. It provides a different model, and if successful, it can potentially, I wouldn't say turn the tide against what China has done so far, but definitely bring a new player and a new game in town in terms of global infrastructural competition.
Thank you very much for that. Does it have any projects now? Anything that's actually, any bricks or cranes up? That's an
there are a few projects, especially on digital connectivity or on railway links among Gulf countries themselves, and there are already studies to build new electricity cable and the new digital cables to connect countries along the route.
And this is coming from a sort of joint IMEC fund, is it, that all these countries, contribute to?
Not necessarily all of them in all the projects, but some of the partners on their own link and some others on the other part. In certain projects, they're all involved. In others, it's bilateral, trilateral, or quadrilateral initiatives among IMEC signatories.
Okay, I'm still. Can I just ask you to drill down a little bit more? Can you tell me where a specific project is and what it looks like, and where the trenches are, or the ports are, or whatever it is?
Yeah,
Belt and Road, we can grab at it straight away, but this one seems a little bit more opaque.
There's an ongoing project, which is in actual construction, to link up the railway lines of all the Gulf Cooperation countries' infrastructure. It started before IMEC, but with IMEC it gathers momentum and it creates strategic significance. Then there is an undersea cable linking Italy, France, Greece, and Israel, and planning to go also through the Gulf and reaching India. There are projects to build an electricity exchange cable between India and the UAE. So there are different projects. Some of them span the entirety of the corridor. Some of them are localized. But the IMEC is not just an enabler. It brings what was already a useful effort. It brings it to a new strategic dimension for the participants.
And you said earlier that it couldn't counterbalance the BRA globally, but could it counterbalance it regionally? It
could, not to the extent that China would disappear in terms of influence or presence into those countries, but it would offer a hedging opportunity, and it would provide countries along the route with a complementary effort, reducing potentially their reliance on China as the main provider of infrastructure.
And could you just explain this different development model? Because if you're building a bridge or building a cable, it's a cable and a bridge. It's not necessarily an autocracy or a democracy. So where is the difference in the development model?
The difference is in the standards that would be used, in the governance structure that in IMEC is supposed to be collective and cooperative rather than exclusive as it is a China-based model. And I would say also in the terms that all countries along the IMEC route are direct protagonists in shaping the projects, while in most cases of the BRI, it would be China coming and saying, I'm going to build a bridge, which maybe was a bridge that was already needed, but there's very little say in recipient countries of the BRI about the project themselves.
And for development, general development, getting those bridges built, which one is better, IMEC or BRI?
We would need to say, because IMEC so far has built very little bridges at the moment. The aim is to build more quality and cooperative infrastructure that would bring to better long-term benefits.
Okay. And what question I'm going to give you from Ritu Martin, one in the audience here. How can the India, Middle East, Europe corridor partners make sure the project fosters cooperation without replicating the debt trap and dominance problems seen in the Belt and Road Initiative? And I'll add to that also the debt trap that Western governments got into during the 1970s and 80s.
Oh, that's a very good question. The first is looking at financial sustainability of the projects. A good part of the debt trap was not just China willingly forcing those countries to rely on Chinese debt, but also very poor analysis done before, so things were not as effective as they were thought to be. But also the critical challenge for IMEC in avoiding that is to bring in significant amount of private capital into the initiative, and this has to be done not just by guarantees provided by public entities, but also by effective projects that provide economic benefit, and also by building infrastructure and connectivity that relies on high and effective standards. It is a quality challenge that has to be won in order to avoid all those challenges. And in particular, it is also needed to bridge financing between all different actors and potentially involving external partners into the initiative.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. That has lifted my learning curve. And we are now on to Jean-Loup Samaan, Institute of the National University of Singapore and at the Brent Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative, the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. He's been an advisor to the French Ministry of Defense and to NATO, and the author of several books, the most recent being New Military Strategies in the Gulf, The Mirage of Autonomy in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. Mirage of Autonomy. Who or what is driving the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, and how much of it is reliant on fluctuating politics, whether it's the Trump administration, inter-Gulf relations, Israel, and so on? Jean-Loup Samaan, share with us your knowledge.
Thank you very much, Humphrey, and thank you very much to the Democracy Forum and to Lord Bruce for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And I mean, to go directly to your question, because my interest in IMEC is mostly at the political level. So it's worth maybe going back to the origin of the project and to see that there was, as the title of this discussion says it, there was the idea of counterbalancing China, but there was also another aspect, which was building on the momentum of the Abraham Accords, the normalization process between Israel and several Arab states, namely UAE, Bahrain, and at the time, hopefully, with Saudi Arabia. The reason I'm mentioning that is that at the political level, this is one of the first issues today in 2025. The fact that this initial momentum, the Israel-Arab normalization process, is at best on hold. We've seen, obviously, because of the war in Gaza, that for the most part, those relations have been on hold. We saw recently with the visit of Mohammed bin Salman to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to the US, that despite all speculations, Saudi Arabia didn't make any statement with regard to Israel. And interestingly, the Trump administration didn't even try to push for something. That's, I would say, the first obstacle, because if you look at the initial plans for IMEC, clearly Israel was to be one of the key pivotal states for that project. That's, as I said, the first obstacle. Still at the political level, the second obstacle I see with this project, and probably by now you can already hear in my voice that I'm a bit skeptical with IMEC. The big issue which I can identify is cooperation among Gulf states. As Alberto rightfully explained, the Gulf states, in particular Saudi Arabia and the UAE, play a key role in that framework. And IMEC is supposed also to bring a corridor that involves railway across the Gulf. Right now, it seems okay in the sense that everyone in the region makes statements saying that this project will be completed by the end of this decade. But if we look historically, there has been many projects in the past that completely failed. The reasons are always the same. The fact that you have very difficult cooperation among Gulf states at the economic and at the political level. If you look at the achievement of the Gulf Cooperation Council, it's been very modest, even in the field of trade. So that's also, I would say, a warning on how much we can expect Gulf states to cooperate when it comes to this corridor. In particular, if you look at the current state of relations between Saudi Arabia and UAE, I would also be worried that if we have an escalation in coming years, you could have all of this on hold. But third point, and maybe probably the biggest obstacle right now, is the US. And the problem here is that the US was at the beginning the driver behind this project. You could almost make the joke that IMEC was the BRI, it was the Biden rule initiative. And that's actually the problem, because the Trump administration clearly doesn't want to endorse and to follow on with a project that is identified with the previous presidency, the Biden presidency. If you look at the national security strategy that was published last week, there's no mention at all of IMEC. If you look also at this national security strategy when it comes to the relations between the US and most of the partners of IMEC, well, unfortunately, we don't see let's say a cooperative momentum. So the US clearly under the Trump presidency seems much less interested in that project. And that may relate also to the fact that the approach, the Trump approach, if we can say it's an approach when it comes to counterbalancing China, is different from the Biden administration. IMEC was, in a way, a very traditional American approach, which is hub and spokes, which is building different layers of cooperation. And I think we mentioned the Quad, we mentioned I2U2, Israel, India, UAE, US, all those different formats, cooperative frameworks that were supposed to build, let's say, a coalition of willing behind the US. This is clearly not what we see right now coming from DC. So to conclude, that means that IMEC, as we know it, or as we thought we knew it from the initial plan in 2023, I don't think this will materialize. That's not to say that we should stop the discussion, end of story, there's nothing to say. What might be interesting also is to see that we have alternative small projects that may actually deliver. And I think, for instance, what we see is UAE, India projects. So at the bilateral level, those projects have been rebranded as IMEC projects, but if we look at them, they were in the pipeline, they were launched even before that. So what I mean here is that you will have some infrastructure projects in the region, but at the moment, the US doesn't seem to be interested in leading those projects. And to answer your question, I frankly doubt that this is realistically going to be a counterbalance to the BRI for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Jean, thank you very much for that. I just wanted to, Albert Ritzi just earlier said that it could be a regional counterbalance. You don't think that's possible?
No, and there are several reasons. First, it's a different approach. It's a different design. The money that the U.S. initially, I say initially because this was at the time of the Biden administration, the money that the U.S. government was going to put on the table was nothing compared to what China has done in terms of investments across different regions, Africa, Southeast Asia, and so on. So, it's in terms of the scope, in terms of the financial resources, it's nothing comparable.
And the fluctuating politics that you explained so well there, when the Belt and Road Initiative was first launched, I think within months or a year or so, they were sort of owning or signing up Greece and Italy and moving right into Europe with that. IMEC in 2 years has done a fraction of that, or not even a fraction.
Well, as the discussion with Alberto also underlined, the fact is that 2 years after the initial plan being announced by the Biden administration, it's what we see concretely is projects that were already happening anyway. So what you see between the Gulf states when it comes to the railway project or infrastructure investments between the UAE and India, most of that was already announced before IMEC. So we rebrand those projects as IMEC. And to be frank, the Chinese have done the same with labeling or branding projects as BRI projects, even though it were bilateral projects. But clearly, when it comes to governance of IMEC and so on, you don't have meetings of, let's say, a board of governors for IMEC. It's not something that is tangible right now.
They don't, as far as I'm aware, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there's no sort of central fund for IMEC. There's no board, there's no chief executive, there's nobody that, it's a sort of, as you said, a coalition of the willing project by project. Is that correct?
Yes, at the national level, each of those countries that have been involved appointed special envoys or point of contacts. But that doesn't mean that at the international level, you have a structure or a process of consultation. That doesn't exist. You don't have something like the BRI forum that China convened for a long time. So that's, again, something that I would say points to the fact that there are some limitations. To be fair, also with the initial project, this was announced 1 month before the war started in Gaza, and clearly that took much of the time, the energy of the White House, which at the time was expecting to give more details on the IMEC, and that has.
But as you rightly say, that the Trump administration now is not interested, and we've had this situation in Britain, whether there's a Chinese embassy or not, or whether China, a change of government changes a 20-year program in investment, and that. A.G. Neji has an interesting question here. With all the volatility in the Middle East, what risk mitigation measures are in place to ensure the security and continuous operation of IMEC? Are these enough to make investors confident?
Well, the underlying assumption in the question is that governments have, within the framework of IMEC, thought about mitigation measures. Unfortunately, there aren't. What you see is at the private level, IMEC doesn't change the way the private sector is investing or not in the region. What changes is the reality on the ground. So, for instance, when it comes to the maritime corridor, well, the private sector will rationally look at what's happening in the Red Sea, what happened in terms of disruption of the flow of ships across the region.
So does China need to be counterbalanced?
That's actually a good question, because and to be clear, the countries in the region, so Saudi Arabia, the UAE, that participate to IMEC, do not think that IMEC is here to counterbalance China, for the reason that they are also participating in the BRI.
So this is counterbalance. We'll dive into that as this debate continues, but it's fascinating so far. We're going to go for a very quick commercial break and then on to our last speaker, Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh. Well, welcome back, everybody. So far, we've got getting a sense that there is a possibility that there could be a regional counterbalance, but not a global one. There are political fluctuations in the democracies. One government comes in and loses interest, and there's also the ruptions that are going on at the moment in the Middle East. Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh is an ecological economist and vice president of the Observer Research Foundation in Calcutta. He has worked with governments in Latin America and Europe, including with the World Economic Forum, and was the chief economist at the Multi-Commodity Exchange of India. A vast swathe of experience. So how can the India-Middle East-Europe corridor counterbalance China's Belt and Road Initiative, if at all? Nilanjan Ghosh, give us your argument.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, and it's a pleasure to join this very timely discussion. Thanks to Democracy Forum and Lord Bruce. Now, let me begin by saying that the very question posed by you, as also in the title, that is IMEC a counterbalance to the BRI, is important and provocative and slightly misleading as well. Important because connectivity today sits at the very heart of geopolitics and growth. Misleading because IMEC should not be understood as a mirror image or a rival replica of the BRI. It represents something which is structurally different, a corridor of choice, a corridor of resilience and standards, rather than one only of strategic dependence. I'll come to this point. But now let's look at it. The IMEC essentially emerges at a moment when global trade routes are no longer judged merely by distance and cost, but by risk, reliability, sustainability, and governance. So connectivity has become an economic insurance. Now, why IMEC actually emerged? Let's go back to the very fundamentals, the origin. In fact, in 2021, it was one vessel which got stranded, in fact, in the Suez Canal Red Sea corridor, and which blocked that entire corridor for almost 7 days. And most of the India-Europe trade actually happens through that corridor even today, 90% of that. Then we have the Red Sea crisis of 23-24, which exposed a critical vulnerability in global trade. And Indian exporters were forced to hold back nearly a quarter of the cargo transiting the Red Sea. The consequences were immediate. Longer routes along the Cape of Good Hope had to be followed, nearly 3,500 extra nautical miles. So that added an additional week or more in transit, sharply higher insurance premium, and close to $1 million in added fuel costs per voyage. So for India, this vulnerability is strategic. The European Union is among the top 3 trading partners of India, accounting for around 12% of its merchandise trade and around 15 to 17% of its exports. So as India's manufacturing and value chain integration deepen, dependence on a single maritime choke point is no longer tenable. This is something that needs to be understood, and that is precisely why there needs to be a diversification in terms of the trade route. Of course, in the other way that India has also thought of is the North-South Transport Corridor, which is known as the INSTC. But the IMEC actually responds directly to this challenge. Now, economically, it is not a replacement of the existing trade routes, but it, in some way or the other, adds to the diversification by creating redundancy, speed, and of course, diversification. In that sense, it's a hedge against the disruption rather than a geopolitical gambit. So in the process, what is being created is a new economic geography. And what makes the IMEC distinctive is that it is not a single railway or a shipping lane. It is an integrated multimodal system of ports, railways, energy pipelines, digital infrastructure, linking India's productive base with the Gulf logistics and capital, and of course, Europe's technology and markets. So the good thing about this is that you are creating some kind of a value chain by way of which you have the factor markets in India, you have the product market, the demand side, in fact, in Europe, which are being linked through the intermediation in the form of the logistics in the Middle East. Now, estimates, if at all, in fact, this takes place, the early estimates suggest that IMEC can reduce the transit times between India and Europe by around 40% and lower the logistics cost by around 30%. But once operational, it can handle up to 1.5 million containers annually with a scope to double the capacity. Now, mind this is nowhere near to even what the Egyptian ports are handling, which is almost 10 times this size. So this can save around $5 billion in terms of if only suppose we are not in a position to use the Egyptian routes. But the deeper value lies elsewhere. It creates this triangular value chain. You have a manufacturing and service hub in India. You have the Gulf as logistics, energy, and finance platform. And you have Europe as a technology and demand center. So this is co-created value, not debt-financed infrastructure tied to a single sponsor, which is essentially the BRI. So to respond to your question, is IMEC counterbalance to BRI? Well, not voluntarily. The answer is yes, but not in the conventional sense. BRI is a state-led, bilateral, credit-driven platform. IMEC is a multi-country, standards-based, investment-led, supposed to be an investment-led platform. It does not export a single governance model. Instead, it embeds openness, it embeds interoperability, it embeds market discipline from the very outset. So whereas the BRI is focused on scale, focused on speed, IMEC has to focus on bankability, IMEC has to focus on resilience and sustainability. And this difference is most visible in how the corridor is going to get financed. And finance happens to be the real test here. Corridors generally fail because, let's face it, 50 to 60%, or actually 70% of the corridors fail. It's not because of lack of vision. They fail because capital does not align with the risk. And IMEC faces a financing challenge, not because money is scarce, but because the cross-border infrastructure carries layered risks, which are regulatory in nature, which are political in nature. You have the currency risks involved because of various currencies being involved in various nations, and demand-related risks. So no single financing model can help deliver a corridor of this scale. And that is precisely why you really need a different kind of financing approach, what you call a portfolio approach to financing. And out here, the public budgets alone are not going to be sufficient. So globally, in fact, we know that the infrastructure needs are estimated at over $11 trillion over the next decade and nearly $140 trillion to meet the net zero goals by mid-century. So institutional investors still barely allocate around 5% of their portfolios to infrastructure, despite strong long-term returns. And IMEC's opportunity lies in crowding in this capital through structured de-risking, because the risk is sufficient, as has been pointed out previously. So let me just stop here and maybe respond to a few questions.
That's fascinating what you said. I just wanted to make sure I've got it right in my own. You're saying that IMEC is not a counterbalance or a rival. It's concentrating in the trade practicalities of the region, of what's actually needed to increase trade. And therefore, there's no political rivalry or anything in there. Is that correct?
It is correct. From the Indian perspective, it is correct. From the Middle Eastern perspective, it is correct. It has nothing to do with the political rivalry. It's more of, it is essentially some kind of, I would say, a hedging strategy to de-risk the trade between India and Europe as far as India is concerned.
So is it essentially an Indian initiative or an American initiative?
It was, of course, driven by the United States. It was announced during the G20 India presidency, on the sidelines of the G20 India presidency in 2023. Mm-hmm. Right now, of course, as you know, that US is definitely, no more interested as far as this corridor is concerned, and it only remains between India, Middle East, and Europe. So given this, one thing is very clear, that the public first of all, because this question of financing came up, and you asked this question to the other speakers as well, whether there is a centralized framework by way of which this financing is happening. First of all, let me put this, that there is not a single estimate on the amount of financing needed to materialize this entire corridor in public domain.
It's not that there's a lot of things aren't there, but what you're saying is very interesting, because is it the case then that for development of the region, both the BRI and IMEC are beneficial to that development? They can work together. They don't have to work as rivals.
Indeed, it is. Because first of all, see, as far as India is concerned, India is not party to BRI in any way. India simply wants its own interests as far as its own trade routes are concerned. And it wants to diversify these trade routes. It shouldn't be confined to only the Red Sea-Suez Canal corridor, precisely because of the risks involved. It has already diversified, in fact, this trade route through the North-South transport corridor, which is moving through Russia. But at the same time, it really doesn't want, again, the risks are also involved there. Now, IMEC turned out to be a non-starter initially because of non-starter or a slow starter. I shouldn't say non-starter. Non-starter is a very harsh term to use, because money is pouring in, but in bits and pieces. But the fact remains that it's precisely because of the volatility of the geopolitics. In fact, the issue that the conflict that was going on, in fact, in Israel, and then of course right now we have some kind of a ceasefire, but well, whether you can really call that a ceasefire, that turns out to be a choke point. Yeah. One of the critical choke points that.
Yes, we were talking about the fluctuation of politics at the moment, and given that unpredictability, do you see sometime in the future India actually signing up to the BRI?
No. Clear answer is no.
Why would that be not?
At the very outset, when the BRI was conceptualized, one of the critical, I would say, economic corridors that was thought of was the BCIM economic corridor, the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar economic corridor. That was way back in 2014. Yeah. And India was definitely not interested in that, because, first of all, one very important issue which India has always been harping on is the strategic or autonomy in all these connectivity projects. Now, IMEC fits into that because unlike the bilateral credit-driven infrastructure models, just as what BRI is all about, it's a bilateral credit-driven infrastructure model. IMEC is a multi-country standard-based investment-oriented model. India should not be a passive recipient of infrastructure. It has to be a co-shaper for rules and governance. BRI is not that. It's a pretty top-down kind of approach. Yeah. And this matters to India at a time when debt sustainability, asset control, and political leverage has become central concerns. This is a concern of global connectivity debate as also for India.
Thank you. Can I put you a question from our audience, Philip Bowman, who says, what are the likely long-term socio-economic benefits for local communities living along the IMEC route? That's beyond the national trade statistics. What are your thoughts on that?
If it works out, definitely it's going to generate employment. There is no doubt about that. Given that IMEC is not only about trade, it is also about, from the perspective of, it is also a green corridor because it also entails green hydrogen. It is supposed to be, that is precisely why, in fact, there have been talks about green ports and other things. It is also supposed to be, a green energy in the sense. I mean, the International Solar Alliance, which was also, in fact, announced during the G20, the IMEC is also supposed to be embedded in the IMEC. So, and in any case, when you create infrastructure, when you create these types of facilities, along with that, it is going to generate local level employment on the one hand. Secondly, of course, enhance the the income generation and the GDP. Yeah. So these are going to be the positive externalities of that entire process.
Good. I want to ask you one last question and then open that question and others out to the other panelists. But this is from Prashant Kumar. Given their diversity, how can all the IMEC partners ensure that their different national interests and government models are aligned in the long term? This reflects what we've been talking about generally, is that it's not one authoritarian power driving through. It's a congregation of nations and leaders doing it. What are your thoughts on that?
In fact, this is one of the critical elements. One of the choke points where, in fact, which has also been mentioned by the previous speaker, that whether we are going to have a more uniform approach. It is not only with, suppose when we get into some kind of a trade agreement or an economic corridor, then definitely nations have a common interest, that is trade growth and economic growth. But at the same time, the issue arises with uniform regulatory architecture. That is the first and foremost thing, because we have different types of interests, different types of architectures, governance. So how do we bring that about? And this is something that we have also mentioned. In fact, the first report that we brought out on the IMEC, that we need to have certain amount of uniformity, which can reduce this entire transaction cost of doing business across this entire economic corridor.
Okay, can I open up to the panel now these thoughts that are coming in from our audience? Alberto Ritzi, that this diversity among the IMEC partners, and there's another one that has come in from Anand Tumar here. How will the IMEC project ensure it sticks to these high environmental and social standards, which we've discussing, avoiding the criticisms of environmental degradation and community displacement faced by some BRI projects? But first, Alberto, are you agreeing with your fellow panelists? They don't see it really as being a counterbalance at all.
Well, I would say it has the potential not to be a counterbalance in the very basic sense that without IMEC, it's just the BRI present in, say, in the Gulf or in other parts, that you don't have a tool to push back, especially from a Western perspective, to this Chinese infrastructure influence. So IMEC offers a way to do that, but it doesn't translate into automatically a counterbalance if it is not effective, if it doesn't meet high standards, and especially if it does not deliver in terms of economically and as some of the questions that were asked, also in terms of social results.
And just ask it, does the BRI need to be counterbalanced?
Well, if you don't want to depend exclusively on Chinese finance or Chinese-led supply chains and trade routes, definitely yes.
I see. And the idea about the IMEC partners and the different national interests that we're on and the environmental thing, I mean, there's a whole idea here that this is yet an alternative juggernaut that's going to go through and tear up the countryside and all of that sort of thing. But it's not that, is it?
It's, again, we still don't know exactly how it will take shape in certain elements. if the green energy component really picks up space and it gets development, especially between the UAE and India, and as we are already seeing some in the Mediterranean between Europe and Israel, if it goes in that way, we do have a significant component that helps preventing some of the damages and defects that the BRI put forward. But again, high standards would be required, and that would require, as Dr. Ghosh said before, a certain degree of regulatory convergence between the IMEC partners.
Yeah. Jean-Loup Samaan, do you agree with what you've been hearing from your fellow panelists?
With everything, you mean, or
no? Tell us what you disagree with.
No. I honestly think the challenge for us here is how to make sense of a project that was very big, very ambitious at the political level, but very vague when it came to economic, financial implementation. And again, this is a project that was started by a U.S. administration, and as we've seen on many aspects, the U.S. completely changed in its foreign policy, and in particular when it comes to the very notion of cooperation. That's I think why we may see here and there some disagreements or nuances, but otherwise, I mean, I tend to be on the side of skepticism when it comes to let's say IMEC as we know it. But one thing which I think is worth stressing is, as mentioned during the conversation, you have some ongoing projects. Most of that, and I think those that will eventually deliver, this will be, I bet, at the bilateral level, if not just at the national one.
Right, I see. Do you agree with Nilanjan Ghosh about that this is an issue of trade practicality as opposed to one of two political systems rivaling each other?
Yes, it is about.
Sorry,
it is about. Oh, sorry. For me,
I just wanted to see if Jean agreed with you or not, and then I'm coming back to you.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Jean?
I think there's a mix. Let's say that the standards, the technicalities surely matter when it comes to making sure that if we discuss maritime corridor or so on, but usually the trick or the biggest challenge is not when it comes to the technical aspects. The problem is at the political level, when you have political passion, which is by essence irrational. So when you have, for instance, a blockade in the Gulf, like we had between Saudi Arabia and Qatar for 4 years, that closed the airspace, closed the borders between several Gulf states. How do you do with this projects?
Nilanjan Ghosh, just finally, how do you get around that, the politics superseding what trade needs?
Political will is the key, no doubt about that. And in any case, politics has to, if at all trade has to happen, politics has to supersede. I mean, the political will has to be there. But there are choke points, undoubtedly. The geopolitical tensions have been a choking point. There are underrated logistical choke point, in fact, which probably nobody has gone into, I mean, so far, except for those who are facing it already, in fact, as far as the businesses are concerned. I mean, the idea is that if you look at this entire map of the IMEC, where you find a few dotted lines, the idea is that the Indian ports, especially the western ports in Mumbai or Mundra, can carry cargo to Jebel Ali or Dubai in the UAE, from where it moves over railways through the UAE and Saudi Arabia till the Haifa port in Israel. And from there, in fact, it can move to Piraeus in Greece and the European ports. The railway lines in many parts of the routes are either under construction or are completely missing. The Haifa port's cargo handling capacity is 30 million tons annually, whereas Jebel Ali in Dubai, in UAE, has a capacity of 90 million tons. So think about this: 90 million tons, arriving at Jebel Ali, but somehow it gets choked at Haifa port precisely because its capacity is 30 million tons. Therefore, despite a higher capacity landing at Jebel Ali, almost 2/3 of that may not find an avenue to be transported to Haifa, even if both ports are operating at full capacity.
Thank you. Sorry, because we're running out of time, but this choke point is very interesting. I now want to go to our resident politician, since we're talking about politics and trade, who is the chair of the Democracy Forum, Barry Gardiner, MP. Barry, you've been listening to us. You are a politician. What is your view of our debate?
And a former Shadow Secretary for Trade.
Yeah. There we go.
So, look, Charles set us off with the elements here. Legacy for India's G20. And I think posed the question that everybody's been trying to answer. Was it puff? What was it about? Yes, it reduces transshipment time, ideally by 12 days, 5 to 8% increase in Indian trade, but there are political risks. And was it too little, too late, he asked, or was it as ambitious as it was presented to be? And I really enjoyed Alberto's response. He focused on the practical. He said, look, in practical terms, this is infrastructure. You can counterpose that to the BRI, which is much more conceptual in its flavor. In that sense, it's not an alternative for Middle Eastern countries. It's geographically limited, but it is a genuine trade route that's trying to get alignment along that corridor. But what it doesn't have is that same driver that the BRI has, which is Chinese hegemony, role, culture coming after it, dependence by adherence to the BRI on Chinese finance and so on. And I thought it was really appropriate also that Anand Tomar, who asked a question, it was a very sensible question, or a very poignant one for me, because he focused on the ecological damage that some of the BRI projects have done, and wondered if IMEC could avoid that. But ultimately, Alberto said, look, IMEC is democratically led. BRI is not. It's technocratic. It's marketed as a tool for the global South to come out of poverty, but actually, as we know, has trapped many countries in a debt trap. Jean-Loup spoke of the origin as a counterbalance and building on the momentum of the Abraham Accords, which I thought was a very significant point, and actually shows the way in which there almost inevitably then followed a breakdown in the vision. He said that the normalization project, of course, is now in abeyance. Israel's role now diminished. Cooperation amongst the Gulf states, fraught as their ability to work together politically and economically, has always been somewhat suspect. He spoke of the Gulf Cooperation Council and the problems it had encountered. Also brought to the fore the fact of IMEC being initially a US project under Biden, and the way in which Trump no longer wished to engage in that, and had a new US strategy, as we've just seen lately, which doesn't reference it at all. So the hopes and projects will not materialize, save in a bilateral mandate rather than in that sort of overarching, comprehensive, architectonic, that strategic way, which I think perhaps it was rather grandiosely presented as at the beginning. And He said the BRI was more energetic. It had that central coordinating body, and I think also had the budget to go with it rather than being ad hoc projects. So envoys to IMEC, he said, have no executive power. Gaza sucked US capacity out of IMEC. In a sense, I thought Jean-Loup's comments were summed up by no plan survives first engagement with the enemy. Nilanjan Ghosh, fascinating contribution and really drilled into the finances here. He I think was very astute when he said it's misleading to see it as a counterpoint because it's structurally different. IMEC is infrastructure of choice. He spoke of the precipitate problem of the vessel blocked in the Red Sea, the increase in fuel, the cost, the increased insurance cost, the increase in delay and labor costs concomitant upon that. The need to diversify the trade routes for economic security being a fundamental issue here and a driver of this. A hedge rather than a political gambit was how he put it. And I think he really made us focus on the economics here, which was incredibly valuable. He talked about the factor markets in India, the demand markets in Europe, and that sort of middle financing in the Gulf states. But he also spoke about how it would reduce logistic costs by up to 40%. So the BRI had scale, had speed at its beginning. IMEC platform faces problems, which he, I think, really ably outlined about the problems of cross-border risks, tariff barriers, standards not being aligned, the need to get that alignment of the railway, and then at the very end there spoke brilliantly about the bottlenecks that there would be in the system. Now, if those bottlenecks can be cleared, if a genuine consistency of standards across the corridor can be maintained, obviously it can produce the economic benefits that were originally anticipated, but it has never been the conceptual project, the drive to hegemony that the BRI has behind it. I did, I'm afraid, think, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. It had this sort of, we are going to rival the BRI at the beginning. It had this great sense of claim, but actually the delivery, I think, has been much, much more denuded.
Barry, thank you very much for that. Excellent contribution there. And before we go, I would just like one line from each of you to sum up your own thoughts. A counterbalance to the BRI, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. Alberto Ritzi.
I'd say that IMEC has a good chance to reduce dependence on China for the countries along the corridor rather than completely push back against that.
Reduce dependence on China. Jean-Loup Samaan.
I'd say that IMEC no longer exists as it was initially conceived, and the challenge is to see how at least the European, the Middle Eastern stakeholders, as well as India, can find a way to revive it or to find another framework.
Thank you very much. Nilanjan Ghosh.
In terms of scale, right now, no. BRI already has an investment of $1.1 trillion US. In theory, yes, but not in the conventional sense.
Thank you very much. Thank you for our Times Wing chariot is attacking us. And thank you all for your arguments, your insights. Alberto Ritzi, Jean-Loup Samaan, and Nilanjan Ghosh, the Indian, Middle East, Europe corridor, counterbalance the BRI. Not yet, I think, is the answer. And also your wonderful contributions there. Our next Democracy Forum debate is January the 13th at 2 p.m. London time. Who controls the minerals of the future? Central Asia, India and the new supply chain battle, a much overlooked topic. Please join us. And until then, from all of us at the Democracy Forum, have a safe, tranquil, and restful holiday season. Thank you and goodbye.
The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.